afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast. Lehr with me, a host, Imperial Dame. We're off here to have a look at the M4a3e8 Sherman, also known as the EC8. A 9 command point Sherman tank available for the rifle company. Upgradable with a 50 caliber 70 munitions, costs 380 manpower and 135 fuel. And also, like the other Shermans, possesses the ability to lay down the smoke screen quite nicely, firing 3 smoke bombs, by the way. For 30 munitions, it's overall a reasonably versatile piece of armor. It's slightly more armor than your regular Sherman, so has a high chance of bouncing shots. It also possesses more penetration than your average Sherman, thus being more effective versus armor. So it is also vital to keep in mind with the Sherman EC8. It is less effective than the high explosive rounds, but overall it still also performs reasonably well, in particular with the 50 caliber mounted on top. Mind you though, as you might be noticing here, it's not exactly a heavy tank. It's not going to allow you to walk through armor and not burst into flames, so keep that in mind. It's not an assault tank like that. It's not going to be something you go, yeehaw, let's kill us some crowds and, do that. At least not unless your opponent is a real fool. So keep that in mind with the Sherman EC8. They already have started to know a little how not to use it. Take 2 here for our friend with the EC8s. Hopefully he'll less try to play it like a tiger this time around. In terms of sort of strength, the EC8 is, well, between a Panzer IV and a Panther essentially in strength, or between a Sherman and a Panther essentially. I mean, it's sort of there, but I mean, going up versus a Panther will lose in armor, penetration, and overall health. I mean, overall, your opponent have to be pretty bad with this Panther to lose versus an EC8. It is reasonably speedy again with the 50 caliber. Overall, I mean, it will perform better versus infantry than the Panther, though, say for example, less well than the Sherman or a Panzer IV. But overall, it can generally dominate versus medium armor. It's also reasonably cheap, so you can actually get several of them. I mean, it's not as expensive like, say, a Panther. And certainly, I mean, you don't necessarily have to have the requisite, tech to get it necessarily as such. I mean, in that regard, currently it's also quite the alternative. So that, of course, is also a neat little detail to keep in mind. Though, be careful you don't become too addicted. I mean, some players can just get too addicted, just mindlessly calling them in and just sort of throwing that enemy in again. Remember, it's sort of an in-between vehicle. Good at sort of departments, but it doesn't really excel in any areas. It does not excel. If, for example, it does excel versus armor, nor does it excel versus infantry. It performs well versus infantry. It performs well versus armor, but overall, I mean, it will, for example, again, lose out versus a lot of things. Also versus heavy armor, it will struggle. So, I mean, you have to be a bit more bear with it. But again, it will perform better than the Sherman. Again, it's sort of a decent in-between platform for things. But generally, I mean, depending on what you're facing, you usually want to sort of augment it with either something good versus infantry or versus better versus armor. So unless your opponent's really relying a lot on Panzer IVs, for example, I mean, there's not a lot to fear there. And again, note that it can do a lot of infantry damage, whereas infantry can sort of, well, not wipe out the squad, but it can certainly take out a huge chunk of it. So keep that in mind with it. Veterancy bonuses are likely the same. It gets radio net, gains the ability to navigate the field, and my accuracy and a higher rate of fire. And of course, always remember to use the smoke screen as well. It is a very powerful ability, not to be neglected, and it can be used offensively as well as defensively. Say you're doing an attack, before you attack, pop the smoke screen, or need to get out of there, pop the smoke screen. And remember, you can actually direct where the smoke screen goes. Of course, there's also a little thing there to keep in mind with your Sherman EC8. And of course, crews as well can serve repairs as well. That's also quite neat. And of course, as always, there's always a little trick there. For example, say you had a vehicle out earlier, got some good experience on that, you can quickly switch it out and quicker gain a veteran EC8, for example. But as a general form, I mean, again, it does have more armor than your regular Sherman, but it's not, say, that massive. Again, it's basically something that's going to help a bit versus medium armor. Stuks, Panzer IVs. That's going to have a difference versus maybe you also have a chance of actually bouncing some shots from a Tiger. But anything bigger than that, well, you're going to have less success, to be honest. So keep that in mind. It's not an assault tank. It's not the Jumbo. But again, it will dominate versus medium armor. it'll be alright versus infantry. It can even hold out in numbers versus heavy armor. But again, keep in mind, you know, use maneuver as much as possible. Try not to rely too much on the front armor either, since that's always going to end up badly. And of course, always remember to also possibly try and maneuver in some smoke as well. If you do that, you'll generally find yourself performing well with your EC8. In particular, as it gains veterancy, it can actually become quite the threat towards even heavier armor if used correctly. That is, if you flank it. If you try to, for example, take it head on, it will not succeed quite as well. But again, reasonably solid medium tank, sort of the heavier medium, if you will. But again, you know, don't try to charge into your opponent's lines head on. That will only end up poorly. And yeah, apparently also the Panther forward bomb shots versus it. So keep that in mind with your Sherman EZ8, and you will generally find yourself performing well. Of course, the opponent, keep that in mind while fighting versus the Sherman EZ8 as well. Or you might find yourself not performing too well with it, or versus it, that is. I mean, it is a nasty piece of work, but it can be handled, and if you can knock it out, you can generally sort of cause your opponent a bit of economic harm. So it's very vital to keep in mind as well. And of course, as always, if you're going to play for Doctrine Armor, getting a fuel cache or two up is not going to be a bad idea. And if possible, as always, get the 50 caliber on top. I mean, the pinch armored machine guns in general add a lot to a vehicle's anti-infantry firepower. So that is always good to keep in mind. Always good to keep in mind. So I think that rather covers it for our EC8 friend. And hopefully people should be a bit clear now on its strengths, its weaknesses. Again, you know, in between a medium tank and a Panther. Not an assault tank. Generally alright, can perform well versus several targets. Though of course not the same type of several types of targets. It's got smoke, it's got all the neat allied bonuses and such, and of course the cruise as well. So I mean, try to get your most out of it, and of course, if possible, as always, and you have a more experienced crew initially, try to switch it out and you get a lot more immediately out of your EC8, and that's also what you as an American player want and what your German opponent does not want. So if you can keep those things in mind, you'll generally find yourself doing well with your EC8, and of course the Germans, you want to keep those things in mind as well. And of course, in terms of health, note it has the exact same amount of health as, say, a Panzer IV or a regular Sherman, so it can't take that many shots either before it has to pull back. Also a vital bit of information there. So anyways, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. If you did, why not subscribe, tell your friends, share it with everyone. If not, you know, send in a refund and provide some feedback in the comments. This is Imperial Dane saying cheers.